Secure the Continent, our focus will be Ethiopia. The Tigray People's Liberation Front a few days ago declared that they are open for negotiations led by the African Union. They're ready to take part in peace talks led by the African Union. What's the implication of this for security in the Horn of Africa and Ethiopia in general? And what's the role of Ethiopia's northern neighbor, Eritrea, that are accused of attacking the TPLF and invading Ethiopian territory in all of this? We have more details for you in this package.
Since November 2020, Ethiopia's Tigray region has been at the center of a war. The course of the war and who is responsible for what has now turned into a humanitarian crisis differs depending on the side you ask. The TPLF, which ruled Ethiopia for 27 years before the emergence of Abiy Ahmed as prime minister, is not on the same page as the government of the day in the country. The local Tigray Defense Forces are fighting the Ethiopian National Defense Force, the Ethiopian Federal Police, Regional Police and Gendarmerie forces of the neighboring Amhara and Afar regions with the involvement of the Eritrean Defense Forces. Both sides have been accused of war crimes. The fighting has claimed thousands of lives, leading to destruction of livelihoods, homes, infrastructure and more. Ethiopia set a world record for displacements in a single year, 5.1 million in 2021. On 24 March 2022, the Ethiopian government declared an indefinite humanitarian truce in order to allow the delivery of humanitarian aid to Tigray. On 25 April 2022, the spokesperson for the TPLF, Getachew Reda, said that they have completely withdrawn their troops from neighboring Afar region in hopes of humanitarian aid entering the Tigray region. That ceasefire seemed to have fallen apart after shelling resumed about 2 weeks ago. But things could be about to take a turn for the better as the TPLF says it is ready to sit down for peace talks. While the rebels have stated their desire for peace talks, the government is insisting that the rebels must lay down their arms before the talks can commence. The rebels have also shown reluctance to having the negotiation led by a former Nigerian president and the African Union's chief negotiator Olusegun Obasanjo. Another possible challenge to the peace talks is the Oromo Liberation Army, which the government must deal with. The potential for the talks is the peace that could be brought to millions around the country and possibility of them eventually returning home. Can all parties finally sit down at the negotiating table? Can the African Union lead Ethiopia to peace?
Joining me to discuss all of this live on Secure the Continent today, I have Ledet Muleta. She's a communications director at Ethiopia. Shall continue. She joins in from the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. And I also have Meaza Gebremedhin. She's an international relations researcher and human rights advocate. She joins us from the United States capital, Washington, D.C. And also joining from London in the United Kingdom is Jordan Anderson. He's a senior risk analyst at S&P Global. A warm welcome to you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Secure the Continent.
Thank you.
I'd like to start with you, Meaza. Since hostilities broke out after the truce, could you kindly paint a picture of the extent of fighting which has raged in several parts of northern Ethiopia since hostilities resumed?
Thank you for having me. Since the relaunching of the Tigray genocide, despite the mounting calls for peace talks from the Tigray government as well as the international community, cities across Tigray have been ravaged with drone attacks, particularly the capital city of Tigray, Mekelle, has been attacked multiple times with drone attacks. The Ethiopian government, in collaboration with the Eritrean government, has been carpet bombing the whole city, targeting civilian residents of the city. This includes a recent attack that happened yesterday. There were twin attacks yesterday. The second one was very devastating because people that came to rescue people that were attacked during the first attack were basically the first responders were attacked, and around 13 people have died so far, and the number of days could increase because the doctors don't have enough medication to treat injured civilians with. At the same time, Western Tigray and other parts of Tigray, particularly parts that border Eritrea, remain under the illegal and unconstitutional occupation of the invading forces from Ethiopia and Eritrea. Nonetheless, the people of Tigray, alongside our government and the forces, continue to call for peace talks, expressing our readiness and willingness to abide by the African Union's advocacy and work towards finding a peaceful resolution. This is happening at the backdrop of Tigray being under complete communications and humanitarian siege for almost 2 years now. So you can imagine how there the situation is on the ground.
Meaza, before I move to Jordan, it's not just two sides doing the fighting here. It's not just the Eritreans fighting and the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. There are also talks of TPLF soldiers moving southwards and invading territory in Afar and Amhara region. Can you clarify that position for us?
The Tigray forces are still launching a counter-defensive operation because, as I highlighted at the beginning of the conversation, the Ethiopian government, alongside its allies from within the country as well as from Eritrea, have been attacking Tigray from multiple fronts on over 10 fronts. And the ultimate purpose or the goal of this relaunch attack is to once more reinvade all parts of Tigray and ensure that the people of Tigray are subjugated. The Tigray Defense Forces are on the borderlines trying to defend their people of these genocidal forces. That's what I can tell you.
Thank you, Meaza. Let me bring in Jordan from London. Now, Jordan, this is quite unprecedented. The TPLF saying, look, we're open to negotiations led by the African Union. In the past, they've always vehemently opposed the chief negotiator, the special envoy, Olusegun Obasanjo. They believe the former Nigerian president is too close to the Ethiopian central government in Addis Ababa. So how significant is this development by the TPLF saying, look, we're ready to negotiate and come to the table?
It's quite significant because what we've now seen is actually between the Ethiopian government and the insurgent government of Tigray in the north. In a sense, this declaration brings them closer to what they're to each other's official positions on what's necessary for an immediate cessation of hostilities. But actually, we've seen the Ethiopian government and the government of Tigray exchange positions almost somewhat. Previously, it had been the Ethiopian government before the most recent outbreak of conflict. We'd seen the Ethiopian government was insisting on peace talks without preconditions. That's something that at least the government of Tigray is now saying they're happy to engage in a cessation of hostilities without any kind of preconditions. Whereas now, the more the language that we're having out of the Ethiopian government is including the idea that before there can be a cessation of hostilities, that the insurgent Tigray Defense Forces, the TDF, has to lay down its arms. And that's not something that the Ethiopian government was insisting on several weeks ago. And I think this tells us something about the position that both sides are seeing themselves in. And certainly from the perspective of, like, say, the insurgent government of Tigray, for them to make this offer and to offer to now engage in a cessation of hostilities without any kind of preconditions, that indicates that they're feeling under a certain amount of pressure from the Ethiopian and Eritrean military offensives against them. Simultaneously, from the Ethiopian government perspective, that they're now essentially introducing in a new condition before there can be a cessation of hostilities, indicates the Ethiopian government believes they are currently in a position to, well, they're currently in a position of military opportunity. And they are otherwise intending to carry on with the fighting unless they get their demand, which it's very unlikely that we're going to see the TDF simply agreeing to lay down its arms, as it views really the maintenance of those weapons as its final and most important line of defense.
Thank you, Jordan. Let me talk to Ledet in Addis Ababa. Now, the government in Ethiopia says that, just like what Jordan said, they're demanding the TPLF to lay down their arms before any peace is discussed. this was never a precondition in the past. What's your take on this, knowing that it's near impossible for the TPLF to lay down their arms? So why is Addis Ababa taking this position and stand? Because, I mean, most observers will feel they'll welcome this development for peace to reign, because the war's been raging for almost 2 years now.
Thank you, Gbenga, for having me. I think the number one important point that the Ethiopian government is probably, demanding or requesting for disarmament this time around is it hasn't even been a month ago, in August 22nd, when the spokesperson for TPLF wrote and published an article how the African Union led peace process will not work. I would like your audience to understand the position that the Ethiopian government, or I should say the position of the TPLF-led, TDF-led conflict is. Just recently, there was an elections in Kenya, correct? And power transfer happened peacefully. What's happening in Ethiopia is after power transfer, TPLF has gone to the north, basically, and attacked the military of the Ethiopia, the National Defense Force of Ethiopia. So first and foremost, in my opinion, there should be no negotiation with this type of treasonous group. But nevertheless, the Ethiopian government continued try to have negotiations, try to have humanitarian truce, continues to find ways to find a peaceful resolution, but it seems like it's not working. And I believe that the Ethiopian government is somewhat, afraid of what the people of Ethiopia is going to say about this continued conflict that should not have happened in the first place,
so,
or should not have
if I get
continued
you right,
any further.
I mean, speaking on the events that happened in the last few days, the TPLF saying, look, we're open to negotiations led by the African Union. Are you saying that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government is not interested in negotiations anymore, and that window has passed? Because, his actions say more than words. There's been a series of bombing in Mekelle and Tigray. Just 2 days ago, a university was bombed. Yesterday, too, there were bombings. I mean, as a gesture of goodwill, you would think Addis Ababa would respond by saying, okay, we'll set up a team and we'll negotiate, rather than bomb, because this isn't helping their case internationally and to neutral observers. One side reached out
let me answer on
and the other is bombing. Yes, please go on.
Sure. Let me answer on the two topics. Just like I said, just in August 22, less than 30 days ago, TPLF has been very adamant that AU-led peace talks will not work. The Ethiopian government and the Ethiopian people in general, including the people of Tigray, who are Ethiopians as well, are tired of TPLF's flip-flop and trying to pretend and act like the second government in Ethiopia. There is only one government in Ethiopia. Just like there's only one government in every country. Ethiopia is no different. So this group is acting like its own government within a government. That needs to stop. Disarmament should be a number one precondition, because you cannot have two national defense forces. California cannot have a defense force on its own, and then the United States is going to have another form. There needs to be a complete disarmament if there is going to be peace talks with a rebel terrorist group.
Ledet, can I come in here?
That's my opinion.
You do agree that Tigrayans...
Let me answer the second question about being about civilian places being attacked. TPLF is being known for using places like hospitals, church, schools, religious and marketplaces, wherever civilian targets are available, to store equipment, to use as a place for fighting. This is a known fact. So what's happening is the Ethiopian government has been making it very clear that their targets has been military places. So every information that's coming out right now is information in the mainstream media saying that the TPLF members, the TPLF people said this happened. So we do not have
the government in
clear
Addis Ababa
information.
does not allow
let me finish.
for
There's been
journalists to visit.
extremely a lot of disinformation about attacks with fake pictures that have been proven. So
Ledet, you mentioned something quite instructive earlier. You did allude to the fact that Tigrayans are Ethiopians. So if they're Ethiopians, don't you think they have a right to self-defense when the government in Addis Ababa is inviting another sovereign country, Isaias Afwerki, and the Eritreans to, giving them express permission to go into Tigray that are Ethiopians to kill fellow citizens? That doesn't look like what normal countries would do. So the TPLF would have a right to self-defense. And why are Eritreans fighting on behalf of the government in Addis Ababa? Why
Thank you, Gbenga. I think that's a very good question.
Allowing a foreign entity to go inside Ethiopia to kill fellow Ethiopians in Tigray?
Very good question. So the number one provocateur to get Eritrea involved in any form of shape or form in the past, in November, is the TPLF sending rockets to Eritrea. That was the first action. It was reported and admitted by TPLF themselves. So once you do that, Eritrea, which is a neighboring country, has a security issue. They have a national security issue. I'm not saying that Ethiopia, right now, that's why I'm saying there needs to be one national defense force. If you cannot have one national defense force, then every region can start a fight with any country. You cannot start a fight with a country as a region. That is where the rule of law in Ethiopia needs to be tackled. And we need to have all international parties out of this internal conflict.
Thank you, Ledet. I'd like to bring in Meaza in Washington, D.C. The call for negotiations by the TPLF omitted conditions that have previously been set as a precursor to talks, including the fact that Ethiopia's government recognizes the region's right to self-determination. Now, this move by the TPLF to say, look, we're open to negotiations led by the African Union, is it a goodwill gesture, or are they on the back foot militarily?
I think before I answer your question, I want to clarify a few things. First of all, this phony logic about California not being able to have a defense forces is completely out of line. We're talking about the United States, a country that is not committing a genocide against its own people. So it's only logical for the people in California not to have their own military. When it comes to Ethiopia, context matters. I don't think your audience is stupid enough to fall for this kind of logic that actually doesn't make no sense. We're talking about an Ethiopian government that is using a state apparatus and has invited a foreign country to commit a state-sponsored genocide. In that event, the people of Tigray are within their own constitutional right to defend themselves. So let's first clarify that. Second of all, the places that are being targeted in Tigray, particularly in Mekelle, are residential areas. This is one of the victims of the attack. An innocent infant that was in her house and attacked. By the way, her family had to find out of this attack on social media. This is what's happening. But if anyone is interested in learning about the truth, and if anyone that is contesting this fact, the first thing they should do is call upon the Ethiopian government to provide corridor for international journalists so that they can go to the ground and report.
I'm happy you mentioned that point. Sorry to jump in here, Meaza, because Ledet did say, some of the pictures we see, like the bombing of the kindergarten, and some other pictures, because no independent media is allowed to go into the war zone. So it leaves room for skepticism. She did say that some of these stories are lies, and some of the videos and pictures are lies. How do you respond to that?
To people like Ledet and the Ethiopian government, every Tigrayan is a liar, including the humanitarian workers on the ground, the doctors at the Idle Hospital, including myself. Everyone is a liar and everyone is a terrorist. And they would not believe anything unless it comes from the Ethiopian government. So to settle all this issue, people like Ledet and the Ethiopian government should provide corridor for international journalists and observers so that they can go to the ground and see what's happening. Second of all, the people of Tigray have their own agency. I am a Tigrayan. I am here. I can speak for myself and I can speak for my family. A genocide apologist doesn't get to use our pain to score a point. Having said that, to get back to your point regarding the Tigray government's commitment to peace under the African Union, the problem with peace talks that are facilitated by intergovernmental organizations, including the African Union. The problem has been with His Excellency Mr. Obasanjo. Obasanjo has clearly showed that he's not an impartial actor in this conflict. So in order to find a meaningful and substantial peace or resolution towards this genocidal conflict, there has to be a mediator that is acceptable by both sides. And this is only a fair ask. There are so many respectable leaders within the African continent that can actually bring both parties to the table and facilitate the peace talks. So if the Ethiopian government is committed, they will act upon the Tigray government's call for immediate cessation of hostilities and sit down with mutually accepted interlocutors that will work not only with the African Union, but also with other international actors, including the US government and the EU. Because let's be honest, this conflict is affecting the people of Tigray disproportionately, but it also has a far-reaching impact on the stability and security of the Horn of Africa. So I actually would love to take this opportunity to call on fellow Africans, particularly those who live closer to the Ethiopia and as well as Eritrea, to plea with their governments to push the African Union to appoint a new envoy to Ethiopia and appoint another negotiator so that we can see an end to the suffering of the people in Tigray.
Thank you very much, Meaza. Now, let me bring in Jordan. Now, Jordan, you're a risk analyst, and Meaza did mention the implication for the Horn of Africa and the sub-region if this conflict escalates. And I mean, a lot of us will agree that 2 years on in November is a long time because there are devastating humanitarian consequences of this war that's been going on. But looking at the events of the past few days, I mean, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's actions, the bombings in Mekelle and parts of Tigray, when the TPLF is offered an olive branch. What does that mean if you were in the mind of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces? Do you think it's going for the jugular? And have we passed the stage of negotiations? Because the international community seems to just offer platitudes and say, you know, we urge both sides to exercise restraint and, you know, to move back to dialogue. And one side feels, you know, they have a right to self-defense, and the other side feels you shouldn't have two national armies in the same country, because Tigray, they believe, is still part of Ethiopia. So what do you think is going on now, and what are the prospects for peace? Because emotions are running high on both sides.
I think it's important to understand that when we're thinking about the next few weeks, the next few months, both of these sides are operating under very stringent clocks. There's a great deal of pressure that they are both under. From the perspective of the TDF, they are expanding manpower, weaponry, they're expanding fuel on their offensive and counteroffensive operations that they are engaged in. And especially when it comes to questions around weaponry and fuel, that's very difficult for them to replenish. It's very hard for them to resupply for that, especially when they are not overrunning significant other parts of Ethiopia and able to directly take the supplies from there. Conversely, on the Ethiopian government side, there is a great deal of economic pressure that Ethiopia is under. For example, the United States having removed Ethiopia from the African Growth and Opportunity Act, that has put a great deal of pressure on the Ethiopian government economically. Ethiopia is also undergoing a forex crisis, and this conflict is very expensive for the Ethiopian government. Neither side can keep this conflict going indefinitely. And it seems at the moment that both sides are being driven by a belief. It seems as though the Ethiopian and Eritrean governments believe that now is a time when they'll be able to significantly militarily gain. That seems to be their perception, because in spite of the government of Tigray, the insurgents, making this offer, they seem to be continuing the military operations. Whereas from the government of Tigray side, they seem to be believing that on one hand, their official wording is that they are fighting off the offensive from the outside and they're winning. But on the other hand, the fact that they've dropped their previous preconditions indicates that they recognize the time pressure that they are under, and they now believe they need to move towards what is not their preferred negotiations process. So that clock is impacting both sides very heavily. And it's something of a question of which one feels is going to come under more pressure first, for which one is going to break. I wanted to come back a little bit to the question of forces and the question of multiple defense forces. It's an interesting analogy to bring in between the United States and California, and that obviously the United States has a system whereby you have both the national military and you also have the national guards of each state. There's something that's not entirely dissimilarly organized in Ethiopia, in that each regional state is allowed to have certain levels of its own security forces. They're not meant to have heavy weaponry in the way that the TDF now has. Certainly the Ethiopian government doesn't recognize the authorities in Tigray as being the legitimate authorities, and therefore says it shouldn't have access to that. But there's some level of having their own security forces that every Ethiopian regional state is entitled to. And it's a question of recognition and who has the right to control those forces. But there's always meant to be some level that each regional state is meant to have.
Thank you very much, Jordan. A good place to go on a break. When we come back, hopefully it won't be blame games. We will be looking at preferred solutions to conflict that has been ravaging in northern Ethiopia. We'll be looking at the consequences of this conflict that's been ongoing in Tigray and other parts of northern Ethiopia. Do stay with us. You're watching Secure the Continent here on News Central Television. We'll be right back. Thank you for staying with us on Secure the Continent. If you're just joining, this is Secure the Continent. We've been discussing the fragile hope for peace in Ethiopia amidst continued violence following the declaration by the Tigray People's Liberation Front that they are open and willing to negotiate with the central government in Addis Ababa, led by the African Union. I still have here with me Ledet, Muleta, Meaza, Gebremedhin, and Jordan Anderson. Now I'd like to start the second half with Ledet. Now, the United Nations and the European Union and partners welcomed this development by the TPLF to sit down on the negotiation table to see how this almost 2-year conflict can come to an end. They urge the parties to seize the opportunity. How soon do you think peace talks can begin looking at the current situation, which is not a very pretty situation, Ledet? Or are talks off the table?
Thank you. I think that both sides are going to have some sort of. The peace talks have been already engaged by, the Ethiopian government, offered several times. This is a new development in a sense that TPLF has just now, changed his mind. I think there's a lot of trust issues from the Ethiopian people in general, especially those affected because of this conflict, and then the government as well. I don't think something immediately is going to happen. Just because there are a lot of trust issues and, the changing of mind, the fact that TPLF has shown time and time again that they use humanitarian truce time for preparation, for strengthening more military engagement and so forth. I don't think there's going to be any trust on the government side. And I think if we want to be fair, in any country, it's impossible to negotiate with anyone, any region that is attacking its own government. I just also want to point out, since Meaza pointed it out earlier, as if this conflict is, about Tigrayans against Ethiopians. It's not. The Ethiopian National Defense Minister is actually from Tigray region. So this is a conflict of ideas, a conflict of a few, guerrilla fighters, ex-leaders who do not want to transfer power
But Ledet, there are innocent people caught up in this conflict. So when you say, trust issues on one side and it will be very hard to negotiate, let's not forget that there are real-life consequences. There are so many people that are on the verge of starvation. This war has led to the death of thousands of people, and you can't fight a war in perpetuity. People will still have to sit down to talk. How soon can this talk? Because you sound like the central government is not willing to compromise. Compromises will have to be made.
Immediately happen as soon as TPLF accepts to disarm, because that is the only way a country can have its one government. So unless this, they have terrorized not just the Tigray area, but the Afar area, the Amara area. So their process of trying to get back to power, which is something that they, cannot have anymore, has caused a lot of issues. Not only is it causing starvation, it's causing conflict, it's causing economical problems, it's causing several, humanitarian catastrophe. The Ethiopian government is already in power. There is no reason for them to create all these catastrophe. But TPLF has every reason to create this chaos so they can come back to power. So they are the ones that actually should be leading by disarming themselves if they really want peace. If not, the country in general is very tired of the catastrophe that they're causing. And for other international community who are looking at the Ethiopian government and the TPLF as an equal, they are not equal. There is a rebel group and there is the Ethiopian government.
Okay, thank you, Ledet. I would like Meaza to respond to that. Meaza, will the TPLF disarm following Addis Ababa's strong line and that they're not willing to budge? And also, if negotiations ever take place, what will be the main sticking point?
That demand is so laughable. I don't even want to acknowledge it by responding to it. As I said earlier, the Tigray Defense Forces are defending their people, the people of Tigray, the over 6 million people that are being attacked left and right by the Ethiopian government alongside its terrorist partners from the region of Amhara in Ethiopia as well as Eritrea. So as long as the people is under threat, the people are listed. Let's begin there. Second of all, it's very important for your audience to understand why the people of Tigray were forced to arm themselves. By the way, they armed themselves by capturing weapons from the Ethiopian national troops that were in Tigray to loot, to rape the women, and to destroy the region. But the main reason behind the desire or the reason why you forces the state-sponsored genocide that has so far claimed over 5,000 millions to make that fact. Second of all, this notion of there cannot be two governments in one country. I don't know what political science book or what governance book people are reading, but in a federal structure of government, you have a federal government and you have a
Meaza, we seem to be having some...
They're not interested in administering Ethiopia. If they were interested... Pardon?
We seem to, but go on. We seem to be having some connection issues with you. But
can you hear me well now?
Yes, go on, please.
Okay, no, I was saying that TPLF is not interested in administering Ethiopia. They're representative of the people of Tigray. They were elected by over 2.7 million to administer the Tigray region, and that's what they're doing. Anybody that questions this is someone that is not willing to respect our constitutional right for self-administration and self-determination. if the people of Tigray are interested in being administered by the TPLF, it's not up to the Ethiopian government or anybody to say otherwise. Having said that, the fact that there are few individuals at the federal government level that are sustaining the Tigray genocide doesn't negate the fact that the people of Tigray are sick and tired of the Abiy administration that continues to use this kind of excuses while it continues to exterminate them. So peace can only be achieved if the Ethiopian government listens to calls for peace talks and gets away with such kind of ridiculous demands and comes to the negotiation table. So far, the US government has sponsored two shuttle talks between representatives of the Tigray government and Ethiopia. They have met in Djibouti. They have discussed on what the way forward should be. Unfortunately, the Ethiopian government is not willing or ready for peace talks because they know if there is going to be peace talks, then their genocidal mission would come to an end. And that's something they're not willing to do. So in this kind of environment, it's up to the international community, including the African Union, to impose sanctions on Ethiopia and force it to come to the negotiation table. Otherwise, the international community would have blood on its hands, the blood of innocent people that continue to perish in the dark.
Thank you very much for bringing up that point of the international community, and that's where I would like Jordan to pick up from. Now, the World Health Organization's Director General, who happens to be Tigrayan, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, made an impassioned plea that that the international community should come to the aid of Tigrayans, highlighting the humanitarian situation there. And it did suggest that, the world's attention is focused on Ukraine and mainly because of the skin color of Ethiopians. Now, the United